And welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 126th New Social Environment. I'm Emily, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a radical poetry reading curated by Dacuyan. Every Wednesday leading up to the election, a guest curator will invite 6 poets who they admire to the New Social Environment to read political poetry. And today we're also thrilled to have poets Ashley M. Jones, Steve Benson, Cassandra Lopez, Cheena Marie Lo, Aria Aber, and TC Tolbert here with us today. This week of the New Social Environment is supported by the Dermot Company. Learn more about them and the 2016 Hallway Hijack curatorial project that the Rail did with them through links in the chat. The Brooklyn Rail acknowledges that we are on the unceded territory of the Lenni Lenape, Canarsie, Shinnecock, and Munsee peoples. We acknowledge the many indigenous nations with ties to this land, and we recognize that the Lenape still call Mannahatta home. Finally, the Brooklyn Rail stands in solidarity with the uprising unfolding across the country following the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, Nina Pop, David McAddy, James Scurlock, Jamel Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Rayshard Brooks, Rhea Milton, Dominique Remy Fells, and Toyin Salau, and in response to generations of structural violence against Black communities. Black Lives Matter, and we will continue to support ongoing action in the struggle for racial justice. Before I introduce our curator, we'd like to begin with a brief moment of silence. Thank you. And now to introduce today's curator. Kyle Dacuyan is a poet, performer, and translator. His poems appear in Diagram, Lambda Literary, Foundry, and Best New Poets, among other places. And he is the recipient of scholarships from Poets House, Best New Poets, from Poets House, the Breadloaf Writers Conference, Swanee Writers Conference, and the Academy of American Poets. Prior to joining the Poetry Project, he served as co-director of national outreach and membership at PEN America, where he led the launch of a nationwide community engagement fund for writers. Before that, he served as associate director at the Antiquarian Booksellers Association of America. Kyle, over to you.
Thanks, Emily, and thanks to everyone at the Brooklyn Rail, and thank you to everyone who's tuning in, and especially thank you to our readers today. I was really excited and grateful when I got this invitation to bring together a group of poets under this umbrella of radical and political poetry. I think both of those identifiers are sort of shifting always and inevitably. And it's a little more of a challenge for me, truthfully, to think of what constitutes political and poetry. I think that everything that we're doing and writing has political consequence, and it's not possible for us to be conscious of that consequence until we arrive somewhere in the future. Political intention in poetry seems to me both necessary and also subject to certain kinds of calculus that we, again, can't be always conscious of. Radical, I connect to, I think, more readily, because I feel we're subject to all kinds of language in day-to-day life that's meant to enforce convention, some of that being the conventional violences of nation and state. And so what really drew me to these poets was that I think this is a group of 6 people who are brilliant in their different kinds of disobedience. I think that that's, to me, partly what constitutes their radicality. You have their bios in the event page for this, and so rather than just reading verbatim bios, I'm going to give little introductions before each of the readers. Our first reader is Ashley M. Jones. I met Ashley a few years ago when I was working with PEN America, and she was initiating a poetry festival in Birmingham, the Magic City Poetry Festival. And it's been amazing to see that flourish over time, even now in the context of the pandemic. Something that inspires me about Ashley's work, which I feel is also reflected in Birmingham as a city, is this unique fearlessness with reckoning, taking account, bearing witness, telling story. She's the author of Magic City Gospel, Dark Thing, and the forthcoming Reparations Now. Her work has been widely published and awarded, and I'm very pleased she's a part of this reading. Ashley M. Jones.
Wow, thank you, Kyle. I don't even want to read after that introduction. I am so humbled by that, and thank you so much for inviting me to read. Thanks to everybody for being here. I'm so excited to hear the other readers. I would love to start by reading two pieces by two Black women poets who inspire me and keep me motivated and make me feel seen. The first piece I'd like to read is by June Jordan, and it's called Resolution Number 1003. I will love who loves me. I will love as much as I am loved. I will hate who hates me. I will feel nothing for everyone oblivious to me. I will stay indifferent to indifference. I will live hostile to hostility. I will make myself a passionate and eager lover in response to passionate and eager love. I will be nobody's fool. That last line, honestly, if I was a tattoo getting person, I can't take the pain, but if I was a tattoo getting person, I would get that tattooed across my forehead. I will be nobody's fool. That is like the mantra of my life, I think, because there's a lot of fool making people in the world, unfortunately. The next piece that I want to read is by Lucille Clifton, who's my favorite poet of all time. There will never be another poet to unseat her from that position. I don't think. I mean, if I have a poet as a child, then perhaps they will unseat her. But, you know, right now it's all Lucille all the time. And this poem is called Black Women, which so far is the only poem I've ever read that articulates the particular experience of being a Black woman in America in a very short form. Black women. America made us heroines, not wives. We learned the tricks to keep the race together, but had to leave our men to find themselves, and now they damn what they cannot forgive. Even old Massa's son lives in a dream, remembering the life we made him love. America made us heroines, not wives. We hid our ladiness to save our lives. So moving into the pieces that I have written that I'll share today, this first piece you may have seen if you subscribe to Poem a Day. I was very honored to be featured during the poet Gerard Avant's curatorial 2-week period. And so this is a poem that I wrote about this really frustrating assumption that every evil, racist, discriminatory thing was born and only lives in the South. That's not true. That's never been true. And this poem, which is a sonnet, for those taking score, it is a sonnet. This sonnet sort of talks about that, and it has an epigraph by Dr. King. It's called "All Y'all Really from Alabama." The straitjackets of race prejudice and discrimination do not wear only Southern labels. The subtle psychological technique of the North has approached in its ugliness and victimization of the Negro the outright terror and open brutality of the South. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Why We Can't Wait. This here the cradle of this here nation. Everywhere you look, roots run right back south. Every vein filled with red dirt, blood, cotton. We the dirty words you spit out your mouth. Mason-Dixon is an imagined line. You can theorize it, wish it real, but it's the same old ghost, see-through, benign. All y'all from Alabama. We the wheel turning cotton to make the nation move. We the scapegoat in a land built from death. No longitude or latitude disproves the truth of founding fathers' sacred oath. We hold these truths like dark snuff in our jaw. Black oppression's not happenstance, it's law. So the next piece I want to read sort of speaks to something that I've tried to incorporate into my life for the past few years, which is radical self-love, which I think is a political act because this world, this nation especially, really wants us to not love ourselves. And that not loving of yourself allows for a lot of the issues that we see today. And it allows for a lack of empathy for others. And so I've tried to just really focus on loving myself as fully as possible. And for me, that includes committing and recommitting to my spiritual practice and not placing value on my version of God based on standard or traditional religion. Now I'm Southern, so y'all can probably guess what kind of standard traditional religion has been around me for so long, but I was fortunate to grow up in a family that valued our own self-discovery spiritually. And so this poem is about God. It's called God Made My Whole Body. God made my whole body and the way it moves and the way it shakes and jiggles and plops. And God made my smile and the 1,000 tears that fall from my eyes. God made the sun and the moon and the leaf held loosely in my godson's perfect little hand. And God made the summer breeze and the guitar Ron Isley crooned over. And God made the grass and the bugs and the dogs and the trees. And God made all of our bodies to make waste. And God made even the waste that lives in us. And God made the way the world spins and the way it will shake us right off if we don't act right. And God made the rivers which make it possible for us to drink. And God made the clouds which hold the rain. And God made the birds which fly and the wolves that howl. God made the folds of my brain and the thoughts that burrow there. God made my belly, my uterus, and all the little eggs which might become children. God made the doubt that rests there like bubbling gas. God made the silence I wrap around myself some nights alone. God made the music we sing and the music we hate. God made the ears which help us to stay balanced, help us to hear what people say behind our backs and in front of them. God made sweet potato pie and aunties and mamas who know how to add just enough nutmeg. God made my whole body. And God made my grandma and her gold tooth. And God made my grandma and her curly wig. And God made my grandma I didn't know. And God made my grandpa who was a ghost. And my grandpa who was a terror. God made fear and the way it slices us up thin and flimsy. God made the way a hand quivers before it strikes. God made pain. God made the blood which runs and keeps us running. God made an everlasting red. So this will be my last poem. I just made a quick decision that this is my last one. And this piece is one that I wrote after AWP. Last year in Portland, I had been on tour with my second book, and I just had a string of very frustrating encounters with white people who felt the need to say discriminatory things to my face. And it was kind of just bubbling up to this one moment at this party at AWP. And this woman said something to me, and I just had to write about it so that I did not do something else. And I hope y'all know what I mean when I say do something else. Poetry can keep you from hurting people. So this poem is called, and thank you for listening. This poem is called, I Find the Earring That Broke Loose from My Ear the night a white woman told me the world would always save her. I remember that earring made me feel so free, so full of beauty, the kind that you might notice. Beauty that could make my shoulders glow. I remember her face, a light with a devious curiosity in the porch light of that house party. That party in that city which slathered a film over its racism, with clean streets and yard signs proclaiming inclusion. That city in that American state which legally excluded Black residents in 1844, which entered the Union big, proud, and white. Does it matter that this woman was not evil, did not send bombs to kill children in a far-off country, did not buy or sell a single slave? Picking up the earring, unwearable until I find another hook on which to hang it from my ear, I remember again the words and their cool sting. I am a white woman. People protect us. Does it matter what I said to invite these words? Does it matter that I did not invite these words? Does it matter that she thought this was a joke, a sign that she was on the right side, a way to pass a moment under the porch light? I've been thinking about intention lately, how I'm always asked to consider how good a person is, what they meant versus what they said. I think about the man who called me colored at a hotel in 2019. I think about the N-word out of a white person's mouth, about erasure. I wonder about the road to hell, which they say is paved in these same intentions, good. George Zimmerman intended to protect his sidewalk from Trayvon's body, invasively alive. George Washington intended to protect America from Britain's oppression. Never mind those oppressed Black bodies. Yes, I am weaving a rope between George Zimmerman and George Washington. Yes, I am saying it. My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of white supremacy. When she said it, my face could barely twist into anything but fatigue. I am tired over and over again of being told I am not human enough to matter. The white poet rages against me on Facebook. Maybe he imagines my blood against his ivory tower. Maybe he imagines the many bricks my foremothers and fathers built. Lucille, Phyllis, Gwendolyn, Paul Lawrence, Langston, Sonia, Maya, Nikki, tumbling at the flick of his well-educated thumb. Is even my degree a different color, relegated to the back of a bus, a book? The business of poetry so thick with privilege, so smothered in the rust of its old gates. How can you breathe amongst all that rot? On the news, the man they call president tells us to go back from where we came. I think of all the lost ones thrown over boats, the ones locked away in cages, the ones here, sitting as American as the day is long and still called wrong. The earring says, I once was lost when I find it, tells me it can be repaired. It is an earring of the struggle. It wants that ear it once called home. It wants to touch my brown skin and reflect it in its orbiting gold. I look for my pliers, my jewelry kit. The work is always the thing that makes us whole again. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you so much. I just am so grateful to be in a time when you're documenting and writing and making from all of these materials something new and important. I wanted to invite our next reader, Steve Benson, because his poetry and performance making practice, his breadth of work has really shaped and startled my sense of radicality in language recently. I love the freedom of Steve's voice, which comes with an attendant unpredictability. I love his embrace of intuition, the permission he gives to urgency. And while I feel generally cautious or skeptical around claims to truth in poetry, I always feel Steve's very improvisation-based work is coming from deeply true places, true in their inevitable changing. Steve is a prolific collaborator, writer, and artist across mixed media, and I'm very excited for his newest book, What This Is, to appear with Chax Press. Please welcome Steve Benson.
Thank you so much, Kyle, for inviting me, and thank you all for being here, readers and listeners alike, which is, we're all reading and we're all listening. And I'm, maybe I have to do another unmute just in case. Anyhow, I'm going to say that I'm visiting everyone from Wabanaki land in what's also known as Down East Maine, and just excited and thrilled to be here and encounter those that I encounter and learn and have an adventure together. I'm going to start by reading 10 pages out of a poem by David W. Pritchard called 10 Pages of Poetry, but I'm not going to read 10 pages, just about one page. It was written on the 4th of July of this year, and it's an excerpt. I have this desire to throw out money, literally. To convey this, I will change the noun. I have this desire to throw out currency, legal tender. I have had it for a long time, maybe since childhood. That's interesting to me because it disqualifies the impulse from any political symbolism. That's a relief because the politics of just throwing out coins is not a very good one. Coins, I'm only really conscious of this desire when I'm straightening up or cleaning. This morning I was dusting and tidying, not expertly, but I had the spontaneous urge to change the space, to see if it changed me, my mood, or my feelings. It kind of worked. I'm now a little sweaty, sort of stuffy from the dust. I'm allergic, and just really intent on writing about this desire, this feature of my life for as long as I can remember, which is I will be cleaning or tidying and find currency, legal tender, and just want to throw it out. I don't know if I've ever acted on this. Today, I didn't, nor the last time, like a week ago, clearing off the kitchen table. There's books I need to put in the mail for Zach and Aditya still on the table. I have been so reluctant to go to the post office because we're in a pandemic, but I want our comrades to feel this comradely love. I also want to get paid for work I do in the summer. Sweeping behind a door. I'm kind of assuming that you don't want a snapshot of bird's eye layout of the apartment, not if you're this far along, not if you know what to expect from me. I found a nickel, or was it under the radiator? A nickel that I thought I could throw this nickel away. I didn't. Is this a form of getting paid? It's not a lot of money, but in my current situation, I can see my bosses insisting, well, that's a grant. I got a grant I didn't apply for. It turned out, okay, I'm serious. Turns out my application was the FAFSA that I filed in 2019. I got to file that again. Free money. It's really funny to read somebody else's work out loud, and I can't account for it really, except I'm glad to get a chance to try it out. I'm going to share screen here and try using some of the resources of this advice to accent the adventure of being here. And share some imagery that comes from my life here in the past. And as I transition into the present and further on to the future, I made a number of notes I don't know what to do with in order to make a poem that I've already started making here and now. But it's not a written down poem, and I don't know that I would ever have a reason to write it down. In this time of social distancing, the links joining people through the people's determination are resistance. That's what I think. To just have any links between us is resistance. Manifest, declarative, embodied resistance. And we admit all of our vulnerability, of all of us. We're all vulnerable, and we admit it, not knowing what will come of this. So I seem to have written down a few credos here, but I'm thinking all the time about the era of crisis that we live in. I don't know how best to think about it or what to do about it. It's going on all the time. There's a climate crisis and there's a racial crisis in America, and there's an election coming up that's a big crisis. And meanwhile, we've got a pandemic going on here and all over the world that's way out of line and way out of proportion, and it's destroying us and hurting us a lot. So everybody's hurting with their anxiety and depression and limitedness and reaching out. Well, the reaching out often is really great when we actually can feel a sense of touch about it when it's through a virtual space like this, rather than through knowing what the feeling and tactile sensation of the hug or the embrace or the massage or the kiss is kind of tough. To see the interbeing, yes?
I might ask you to turn the volume down a little bit on the shared sound, just so we can hear you a little bit better, if that's okay.
Oh yeah, I'd want to be heard reasonably well. Thanks. Okay.
Thank you.
I wrote this down on the other side of the piece of paper. To see the interbeing, to feel interdependency of all phenomena as much as to feel it is to witness trauma, to feel trauma. We are living in that sensation off and on. And the longer I live, this pain, torture, agony, more I'm aware of these connections that occur, things falling apart. The more things fall apart in my own mind, everywhere I look, I feel lost, I feel betrayed, I feel confused, I feel insecure as could be, but I'm tolerating it going on, noticing the feeling, accepting, oh, it's reasonable to feel this in that way, very reasonable. Getting older is like that too. Being queer is like that too. There's a lot of edges of insecurity as well as, oh, I share a condition with a lot of other people. It's okay. We're in it together. And so the way I think of resistance, linking into, really sharing some committed sense of mattering and caring is a risk. And the more how to perform it, how to act on it is an unknown in a lot of ways. I don't like to assume that I'm right or that somebody else is all right, especially for the rest of us. So we kind of go on wondering and trying and drying our hands and fighting or flighting. And that fight or flight that becomes sort of political discourse of reactivity and emotional urgency and power is risky and dangerous, and we're vulnerable to that too, at the same time as it's necessary as part of the passage that we wind up having to go through, of course, and we will go through it again and again, and we need to accept the difficulties of feeling that it's not necessarily hostility. It may be just looking for energy, looking for a reaction, looking for contact, looking for a sense that we're making a difference. So our central nervous system kicks into the fight or flight impulsive nature of things, and our planful, constructive capabilities may be eclipsed in that way. And it's hard to look after others, however, and it's hard to be looked after if we're thrown this way and that by our fight or flight impulses and temptations. I wrote this piece, a little piece of 8 lines, after reading another poet writing recently in this past month. Whenever I pick something up, something else is tossed into the air through that leverage and lost. I don't know where or what to look for, and all the time everyone is getting older, and not just me, nor am I the most alone. We agree, we disagree, we try out different attitudes and mannerisms. We try to see what matters to us most. Everything seems up in the air and showing its seams that are stitched together from our expectations, our uncertainties. And I no longer know how to live. I don't know how to cook. I don't know how to walk. I'm trying to relearn a little bit at a time, but I have resistance in my own capacities to learn some things. And there are many, many waiting to instruct me and tell me how to do it and what to do it. Many of them are online. In fact, almost everything seems to be online, unless I have a book or I have a magazine or I have a phonograph album handy, and thank heavens I do. So many. And I advise others through the work that I do for money. I do money work to try to be helpful and useful to other people. And where does the buck stop? I don't know if the buck ever stops. I think the buck keeps moving. Animals are dying. We're dying. I'm dying. You're dying. And we are the guinea pigs of the neoliberal experiment, taking advantage of us and offering us great opportunities to become, highly limited versions of ourselves and see how we like it. I would prefer a greater adventure, a more exciting possibility, and somehow living in a consensus culture of that is. I want to live within something that can really own and experiment and explore the chances to be a democracy. I don't think we're at the stage of after all is said and done, but I'm not sure how we will gain traction on time in order to get beyond this time into the next phase of being alive. And I'll close my screen share. This was my experiment at doing whatever I would do today. And thank you for witnessing it and tolerating and being present. Thank you all.
Thank you, Steve. I think what you were just saying at the very end, that you were saying something about chance and democracy, and it was making me feel that one of the things that drew me so intuitively to Steve's work for this reading is that within the space of democracy, entropy, or what we might sometimes call anarchy, is an essential element. And I love the way that Steve introduces and embraces and thrives on entropy in his work. So thank you. Our next reader is Cassandra Lopez. I've followed Cassandra Lopez's poems for several years and try to share her work with as many people as I can. I have an almost physical memory of my first time hearing her read from the book Brother Bullet and from her memoir In Progress, A Few Notes on Grief. I'm totally amazed and surprised by the way Cassandra brings together personal, global, and national histories with examinations of policy and law, with lineages of narrative, and always with an attention to the ripple effects of language as a material across time. Cassandra is a founding editor of As Us and teaches at Northwest Indian College. Welcome, Cassandra Lopez.
Thank you. And thank you, Kyle, for the introduction and everyone. I'm going to read a poem, one of my favorite poems, poets, Michael Wasan, who is a Nimimpuu poet from the Nez Perce Reservation. I think he currently lives in Japan. I wasn't familiar with this particular poem, but it just seemed very fitting. So I'm going to go ahead and read it. It's called Your Shadow Invents You Every Time Light Fails to Pass Through You. Some days you wake to the sound of smoke pouring through the keyhole in the room. Open your eyes. This is only a test. The bluing of your hands can be anything you want. The bruised dawn like a river rising to your windowsill. A purple forgetting of how blood leaves the body in ruin. A forsaken lip smeared in thirst resting on your lip as through your skin could savage the dream of being so touched. Listen, I know you're afraid. I am too. I know how the body prays for beauty but remains a shipwreck. You are building in my image. How many books are enough to tell you you're alive today? How many days end up all dark and the monsters of your childhood appear like saints erased of their mouths? How the mouth cradles a tongue carved by years in exile until it's ready to shape a word like a parting hand full of promised wildflowers. Happy Mother's Day. This is you at the edge of a paradise growing back after being scorched from the face of earth. This is us afraid of the men who fail to kiss us goodnight and step through the walls. Some days you are living a nightmare. Some days a miracle as wide as a spared life. Listen to me. There will be a day when the world will need you most to be alive on that day. I vow your father is as American as the bones your mother grew inside you. The gunshot in your head is only a shadow puppet, a slow explosion of a field of clematis in early June's bloom. Look at the colors like little gods on fire, hurtling in and out of each other's terrified skies. Are you still alone in bed? Is it morning yet? Where are you? The smoke turns to rain as usual. Listen, my love, this year is just a visitor and next year's ghost. Take care of it because yes, you do deserve flowers for once in your life. You will be the only one left, so hold my hand and call me tomorrow. We are all here. It's okay to be this afraid. I am you. Can you feel that? Yes, that is the whole world outside moving without us. But listen to me. Listen, here's the light an arm's length away, the ceiling reforming above you like another heaven after its own self-destruction. Hear my body and you stretching lifelong toward every hole in the house, left as warm as a father running from horizon to horizon. Don't be afraid. Touch me here where some days it hurts. Get up, get dressed, open the door. Okay. So I'm going to read a poem that's not in my collection, but it's pretty meaningful for me because I had a lot of shame about this experience. And so writing this poem had been very, very helpful. It's called Recipe. When I was almost an adult, family house was disrupted. We already in mourning near liquid grief, we ready to spill out into pews a memory for grandfather. Newscasters did not warn us of this kind of destruction. Even the streets had been silent that bright Saturday. Or maybe we should have guessed by the way insects nestled in our ear. Doors would be broken even though we were unlocked. Soon there was a swat of green and blue, swat of shame. Color us brown, color us red, order us to split ourselves open, raise our hands, demand receipt for every secret. We alternate between hanging of heads and huff and spurts of anger. See the caution tape. Do not cross. See other brother on his knees through the front door, hand on his head. See him bow before gun and badge. Occupy this body, occupy this house, gather evidence, find only a grandfather's unloaded shotgun and one marijuana plant. If you had asked, we might have explained this remedy, how to soak it in alcohol, how to rub it against the aches where the body feels most hurt. Your war on drugs reveals house is only house. There is a pot cooking on the stove, and they opened that too. A man ladled a spoon in and tasted our salted meat and spice. It warmed his tongue. He said, "You seem like good people." He asked for the receipt and received no answer. Okay, so I'm gonna read this other poem. I don't read it very much, but because this is online, I could like show the visual, which I think is helpful. So I don't know, Tyler, if you could put up how to keep track of San Bernardino's homicide. That's the name of the poem. If not, oh, there, okay, yeah, there it goes. There's like footnotes in this, so that's kind of why I tend to not read this poem, but you can see it here. You can kind of see how it looks. And this is based on a real infographic in my local paper, San Bernardino Sun. How to keep track of San Bernardino's homicides. I tried to write a poem titled How to Keep Track of San Bernardino's 40th Homicide in 2016, but every couple of days the number would increase. 2016 ended with 63 homicides before I could complete the poem. The year before, there were 44 homicides, including 14 killed in a terrorist mass shooting. The local newspaper created an online map with clickable orange bubbles. Each bubble is a death, no life. I click, click, click on each one. I try to create something for them, for these kindred in grief. Those of us here who are brothered by the bullet and sistered by the knife. Click on a bubble and read San Bernardino's 15th homicide. A 12-year-old walks to the store with his cousin. A 12-year-old boy walks, then runs, then is no longer here. Some feel trapped and ask, what does a 12-year-old know about the streets? Witnesses track a trail of blood, a collapse of a boy, collapse of a family on sidewalk. This feature was around in 2010. I could click on a bubble and see Brothers Murder Mate infographic, date 12/19/2010, unnamed, 37th, address redacted, San Bernardino, California, victim's name redacted, 27, type shooting, read more at www.redacted. Time marks this as my before and after. This split of a thread, the threat of the undone. I try to hold each number in my mouth, gargle the sting of salt and hurt, the whole of the missing. This house is a cradle, no need for address. I dream the sounds of my youth, helicopters' wings whipping against dry palm trees. The tinkle tinkle bell of a paleta cart, and boys who call each other with summer pitched whistles. I wrote his name, then erased it, wanted only to be spoken by family, tongue, a muscle anchored to root, the cut of bone. His name is always tipped on this opened mouth. 6 bullets. I name each one after an organ or body part. I need something to remain yours. I would carry the shell casings in my pockets if they were not evidence of this city's hunger. Click on a link, but it will not take you to where I go, when I see a masked face sliding into the night, open sharp by a crescent moon. Silver glint a bullet. Years later, there remains so much unsolved. Okay. And then my last poem I'm going to read is called, and you can leave it up there because this can also see how it's laid out. Poem for brother friend who contemplates suicide on a Saturday. Okay, this one takes, I have to have a breath here. Okay. Some days the bed is a heavy call, or maybe it is something else that widens that hole we search for to find the whole of us, the return of us. Your twins run across my family's yard, and I'm reminded of your own boy brown legs running across the playground, your brother trailing you. This is long ago, back when my brother dug up bait worms with your grandfather, and at 5 years, he told your aunt he was going to marry her. Before all the ruckus and recklessness of teens, before my brother came to be your brother as well, you probably never imagined your grandmother would sing Amazing Grace at your brother's coming home and sing it at my brother's a year later. Then another year, and she's singing it at my little grandpa's funeral. Her mouth opens into a song for cancer, a song for bullet, a song for backyards and funeral homes. I fear she will be singing for you too soon. You are drunk singing and shouting on the block, I love yous, I love you, over and over until we can hear you over the music of motorcycle. It is so dark I can barely make you out because the street lights here never stay on like they should. Why is nothing like it should be, except we are here? Is that enough? When it is not, I get drunk on loss too. It fills me up, my hand clutching regret until I am empty again. My mouth clings to the rind of anger. I need that taste of sting to get up and open my eyes in the morning after so much morning. Every day I wake up and it is not a dream. They are all still dead. Is this why you curl up in mother's lap, calling her mom and confess? Say you want to kill yourself. Say, how do you go on? Say, you are a disappointment and I'm all sink to the floor. No words, just witness. Earlier we tried. We are always trying to meet each other's eyes without falling head into ocean. The salt burn on our open cuts turn canyon. I am trying to tell you I'm undone too, and I know no justice, can't touch it the way I could, brother's rough hand. Justice doesn't look like any shape I know. I can't wear it on my ears or wrap it around my shoulders when I'm lonely. I don't recognize any of the letters. I understand that call of bullet or something that takes you to the same place, because every time I answer a door, I'm ready to die. Every time I'm ready for bullet to take me whole. I wonder if brother saw the eyes of the ones who pulled the trigger and knew what was coming next. Or maybe he only saw the good of moonlight because the streetlights were off that night too. A teacher back home is shot and killed. That night I dream fear, a gun in my face It explodes, and I wake because I can. Thank you.
Wow, wow, wonderful. Thank you so much, Cassandra. And I love that we're getting to experience so many of these ordinarily substructural elements in a reading in the space of Zoom. It was really wonderful to see your work kind of graphically scored as you were reading, and similarly to watch the videos that Steve was working with in his reading. I loved in the poems that you were just sharing, getting to see these constant fulcrums that you were making from language moment to language moment. It was tremendously moving. So thank you. This is a great segue. I've been really eager to experience the work of our next reader, Cheena Marie Lo, in the space of a reading for quite some time, because I'm so captivated with the ways they're presenting text, which always feel to me so constructive of new kinds of atmosphere, space, and environment where language gets actively uncoupled from convention. Cheena Marie Lo is the author of a series of unnatural disasters, as well as the chapbooks No Filter and Ephemera and Atmospheres. Please welcome Cheena Marie Lo.
Thank you, Kyle, and everybody. Thanks for bringing us together. Yeah, so when I think about politics, I, sort of think less about the state and more about relationships and mutual aid and the ways that we can take care of each other, connections and support structures, which the state often fails to or actively chooses not to provide. So it's in that spirit that I'm reading work today from one of my dear friends, Tessa Michaela, whose work I find illuminating and inspiring and liberatory in the way that they observe and record and push us to notice the we and the ways that we're connected. So I'm going to read an excerpt from a long poem. It's called Devotion, which is in their most recent book called Where Bells Begin, that came out from Rescue Press last year. Fever is a word O stole from the stranger who walked behind O, as O felt an insistent urge to push the stranger down onto the concrete, but O suppressed it. What O is and what O is not. In O's city, the outside and inside eat each other alive. O skinned O's knee on the way home. O was skin. There was an origin to the bells. When O arrives to where we are standing, we can't say any of the things we've waited so long to say. O admits how hard the holding has been. We are losing, we tell O. We tell O what we have known and haven't had any other reason to say. O rides between river and unsung bells. O doesn't know land, and neither did the others O came from. Even if O did, O has already been removed by the functions of birth and death. What else does O know that comes as close to what O cannot know? The others O came from, dead so as not to intervene. How lucky O is to squint and see shimmering through the window pane, to move forward on machines. What O is or is not has nothing to do with what O says, but it's all we've got. We ask, how does O exist, so undernourished? O says, there is so much we cannot know. O is thinking about the relationships between the others. O is thinking that this thinking is related to power and structures and systems, but as O tries to picture power and structures and systems, O can't picture them. O wonders if any others have a hard time talking. O does. How should O draw economies or labor forces or families? Like O said, O has the hardest time holding it all together. O thinks this has something to do with being inside of the power and structures and systems or outside of them. O thinks that O is inside what O is trying to picture. O is thinking, and O goes unnoticed. O goes to the bank, O drives around, O drinks water from the tap. Like O said, O doesn't hold it all together, drawing lines across images of strangers or structures. O thinks this might have something to do with being inside. O thinks carnivores, the lots of them. We dream of animals in the night, but trespass in the realm of feral. O says, we aren't meant to imagine ourselves so large. And now I'm gonna read my work. I'm gonna read a little bit of some newer work, which is a lipogram thinking around and through loss and kinship, and then a little bit from my book, partly because it is relevant to the themes here, and partly because the book is an abecedarian, and I'm trying to figure something out about sound and letters that are left out in the newer work. And I'm just gonna read all the way through. You're hungry now. I've got a hungry eye, a hungry heart. They are hungry for you. Hungry, hungry again. I've been hungry way down in my heart. We're hungry for a life we can't afford. I'm told they were very hungry, the animal, I mean. I think they meant it probably happened quickly. It probably could have happened to anyone. Hungry for a life without cruelty. Who will care if I'm hungry? We're all hungry. A rare encounter, I'm told. Hungry hippo, hungry Lucy, hungry baby, hungry face. Funny face, I love you. Hungry for love, for more, for heaven, for you, like a wolf, etc., etc. A rupture prompted by a violence of nature, then low level, homo black, keening quietly. No being, not now, nor before, only unfolding, a horizon, infinite future, and yet no plurality, no multiplicity. Fumbling around a new world, mouth around language with inadequate potential. Edit, find, and replace zero with zero. I read a poem recently about an animal and forced intimacy with prey. After the accident, I heard my own voice loud and flat and frightened long after the impact. I can't get rid of the feeling of imminent dread, impending doom, one paw in the belly wound. It probably could happen to anyone. How could I ever forget the feeling of familiarity, immediate, activated relation, of not having to explain, in particular, to another, hi, hello, how are you? What do you do for money, for fun? What do you actually love? What are you making? How did you get here? Are you hungry? Tell me about your life. I am compelled by your practice. Do you want to tell me about it? Do you want to hear about mine? I'm out of practice anyway, extending with the hope of an equivalent reach, a deep dive, moving beyond the adjacent, trying to catch that ephemeral thing, ephemeral affinity, ephemeral connection, ephemeral orientation, ephemeral orange fading into pink, fading into purple, in the firmament behind my head and your head. Take a picture of it. Ephemeral moment in the karaoke room, late night ephemeral, ephemeral wave from the other end of the dance floor, a rare ephemeral encounter, fleeting finger tracing along my back. I'm glad you're here. I watch the texture and warmth of light moving, collected umbrage quivering on tin ceiling in the above time, cutting the calm, cool comfort of conditioned room. Make legible a warning in writing, above, not before, later than, next in time or place, the indefinite now. I enjoy being privy to exuberant, flailing, pure joy down the hallway. How do you know you've made a good choice? How do you know you could have made a better choice? Don't worry, baby. In the living room, a patterned affect, tiny archipelago, waving a wave. I devour the flower in bloom. Did you feel that? The state is in danger of collapse. The phones have been shut down. There is no way home. The people you love, every last one, are all on the other side. A state could be said to succeed. The term failed state is often used to describe a state perceived as having failed some of the basic conditions and responsibilities of a sovereign government. So what about the instinct to survive? So what about birds and burying beetles? So what about support and what about struggle? So what about ants and bees and termites? So what about the field upon which tender feelings develop even amidst otherwise most cruel animals? So what about migration, breeding, autumn? So what about the numberless lakes of the Russian and Siberian steppes? And what about aquatic birds all living in perfect peace? Something about being maddened by hunger, something about exuberant life and bird mountains and new forms, something about association and consciousness, something about the family and then the group, something about the isolation of groups, something about the necessity of communicating, something about simply feeling proximity. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheena Marie. I loved how folks are saying in the chat how wonderfully structural this work is. Your sense of systems of aid and interdependency, and it's just wonderful to listen to. I'm really excited to be welcoming our next reader, Aria Aber, whose poems consistently amaze and surprise me for their deep sense of place and position. I remember reading Aria's poems that so much of the position of a poet is a kind of apartness. And what I love about her work is the simultaneity of tenderness with remove and sometimes fracture. I think there's something loving and original in Aria's consciousness of distance and intimacy as possibly self-same. Aria is the author of Hard Damage and is presently a Stegner Fellow at Stanford, and I'm very grateful to be hearing her read. Welcome, Aria.
Thank you, Kyle, for that beautiful introduction. That was very moving. And thank you for inviting me to participate in this reading. This has been amazing, and I'm so glad I can share the space with all of you. I don't think I will be reading any of my own work unless there is time left. I'm going to start timing myself. I don't want to take up too much space. But I will start by reading one of my very favorite poems by Adrienne Rich, and it's called The Burning of Paper Instead of Children. And I'm reading this because it feels very relevant to our time, even though it has been written many, many years ago. And it kind of problematizes this problem that we have within progressives at the moment, and that's this neoliberal tendency to foreground things that only concern the educated elites and kind of like look away from all the actual problems that are happening in the world. And the poem starts with an epigraph by Daniel Berrigan. I was in danger of verbalizing my moral impulses out of existence. 1. My neighbor, a scientist and art collector, telephones me in a state of violent emotion. He tells me that my son and his, aged 11 and 12, have on the last day of school burned a mathematics textbook in the backyard. He has forbidden my son to come to his house for a week and has forbidden his own son to leave the house during that time. The burning of a book, he says, arouses terrible sensations in me, memories of Hitler. There are few things that upset me so much as the idea of burning a book. Back there, the library walled with green Britannicas, looking again endures complete works for Melancholia, the baffled woman, the crocodiles and Herodotus, the Book of the Dead, the Trial of Jeanne d'Arc, so blue, I think it is her color. And they take the book away because I dream of her too often. Love and fear in a house, knowledge of the oppressor. I know it hurts to burn. 2. To imagine a time of silence or few words, a time of chemistry and music. The hollows above your buttocks, traced by my hand, or hair is like flesh, you said, an age of long silence, relief. From this tongue, the slab of limestone or reinforced concrete, fanatics and traitors, dumped on this coast, wild green, clay red, that breathed once in signals of smoke, sweep of the wind, knowledge of the oppressor. This is the oppressor's language, yet I needed to talk to you. 3. People suffer highly in poverty, and it takes dignity and intelligence to overcome the suffering. Some of the suffering are, a child did not have dinner last night, a child steal because he did not have money to buy it. To hear a mother say she do not have money to buy food for her children, and to see a child without cloth, it will make tears in your eyes. The fracture of order, the repair of speech, to overcome the suffering. 4. We lie under the sheet after making love, speaking of loneliness, relieved in a book, relived in a book. So on that page, the clot and fissure of it appears, words of a man in pain, a naked word entering the clot, a hand grasping through bars, deliverance. What happens between us has happened for centuries. We know it from literature. Still, it happens. Sexual jealousy, outflung hand, beating bed, dryness of mouth after panting. There are books that describe all this, and they are useless. You walk into the woods behind a house, there in that country. You find a temple built 1800 years ago. You enter without knowing what it is you enter. So it is with us. No one knows what may happen, though the books tell everything. Burn the text, said Ortol. 5. I am composing on the typewriter late at night, thinking of today, how well we all spoke. The language is a map of our failures. Frederick Douglass wrote in English purer than Milton's. People suffer highly in poverty. There are methods, but we do not use them. Joan, who could not read, spoke some peasant form of French. Some of the suffering are, it is hard to tell the truth. This is America. I cannot touch you now. In America, we have only the present tense. I am in danger. You are in danger. The burning of a book arouses no sensation in me. I know it hurts to burn. There are flames of napalm in Catonsville, Maryland. I know it hurts to burn. The typewriter is overheated. My mouth is burning. I cannot touch you, and this is the oppressor's language. So this was Adrienne Rich's poem, and I'm going to read one more poem, I think, and this one's by the next one's by Solmaz Sharif, whose work I love. The poem itself is about a mass prison outside of Tehran in Iran, where political prisoners were buried after being executed. It's an anonymous grave, and families of those who have been executed are not notified who is buried there. And it's called The Place of the Damned. And the poem is called Lanat Abad, The Place of the Damned. This mangy plot where, by now, only mothers still come. Only mothers guard the nameless plots. And then, sparingly, peepholes burned through the metal doors of their solitary cells, just large enough for 3 fingers to curl out, for a lemon to pass through, for an ear to be held against, for one eye, then the other, to regard the hallway, to regard the cell and inmate. Peepholes without a lens. So when the guard comes to inspect me, I inspect him. Touch me, he said. And through that opening, I did. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to finish here.
Thank you, Aria. It was beautiful to hear those poems in relation to one another, which both feel to me so so particular in time and place, and then to think about them in relation to each other and to your work too is just really special. So thank you. And we're going to close with a reading from TC Tolbert. TC Tolbert's poems completely reorient how I perceive the possibilities of embodiment and environment. Through the attention TC brings to interdependencies within and between, I think we find these compasses for treating one another with more intentional, open-hearted, open-minded recognition. I love how gently and intelligently TC holds kindness and criticality together. I think we see this in the way he approaches the space of the bio as a space for sharing what calls for sharing. He writes, I never cease to experience simultaneous grief and deep love anytime I pay attention to the world. I'm wild with gratitude for the space and time to be with all of you. And we are wild with gratitude as well. Please welcome TC Tolbert.
Thank you, Kyle. I just want to take a moment and just acknowledge the incredible curation and conversation that you've created in all these disparate spaces. It feels so, I mean, I sort of hesitate to say this because it maybe sounds a little cliche or something, but I genuinely feel connected to all of you, hearing not just your work, but also the works of others that you've chosen to read. And it just, thank you for sort of curating in this way, Kyle. It's really, really powerful. Thank you. And Aria, I just want to say, I am happy to read less if you want to close us out with one of your poems. Just know that's an option. You just give me the okay. I don't want to put you on the spot. I just wanted to say. Yeah, and I'm just so thankful to have heard everyone and to be here with y'all. So I would like to start with a poem by a poet who I constantly turn to as a guide, and this particular poem, I'm just still obsessed with it years later, and I thought we could read it together. Tyler, I believe, or Emily, Did you get that email? Yeah, if you're able to share the Giovanni Singleton piece, that's it, excellent. So this is a piece by Giovanni Singleton from her book, American Letters, Works on Paper. And I'm also hoping we can unmute everyone. So here's the setup. I'm hoping we can unmute everyone for 45 seconds, and as a practice in collaboration and improvisational creation together, each person can say the word bird as many or as few times as they would like in those 45 seconds. And if we're overlapping each other or there's silence, all of that is welcome. Is that an okay thing? Can we just unmute the people? It looks like maybe that's happened. So I'll say.
Everyone can unmute now. Everyone has the ability to unmute themselves.
Excellent.
You can say bird.
Begin.
Same bird.
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 Bird. Say
Bird.
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 Bird. Bird.
Jesus.
Bird.
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 Bird. Bird. Bird. Sleeping here on you. That's the second time.
Sit up higher.
End.
Sit up.
Well, y'all are amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I have some other poems to share that reference this person, Melissa, who is my birth name and is now my middle name. And so what I also, I'm going to ask for more unmuting, is it's just, I feel like we're together when we can all talk. What I'd like to do is show these poems and read through them. And as you feel moved, if you would say dear, a name, an embodiment, a person, a place, a thing that you would like to address from another time or space. The person or thing does not have to be dead per se. When I think about Melissa, she's simultaneously dead and alive to me. And I constantly struggled to understand what that means. And so I just wanted to invite you all, as I'm reading, to call into this space those that you would have be here, as you wish. And I'll just say one more thing about the poem and these poems that I'll just read through. Some I'll skip, and you can catch up as you're scrolling. Thank you so much for doing that, by the way, Tyler. Several of these poems are acrostics, and you'll maybe be able to pick some of those out and maybe not, and that's okay too. Everyone now has the ability to unmute. Okay, excellent. Thank you. A man's arms may trick his shadow. Melissa may become the open chamber he longs to live inside. Held in the lungs of another, what unforetold music may emerge even from the hair of a horse stretched between two bent ends of a Pernambuco stick, and then rubbed against and dried, a twisted selection of young sheep's gut. It is 2019, and every day now the world's windows rattle. Sunrise, that relentless bastard, still searches the dirt for what has the potential to explode. What cannot become louder, larger, if only by eventually allowing itself to be slammed shut. Perhaps this is another way of singing into every day's disappearance, enlarging what survives without justification. Here I am, having never learned how to keep this to the work of every beating body time. What if we did not suspect the dead of going on somewhere without us? Would we call our own names? If we knew the very wind pushing through each fence, each room was to be remembered as another's expelled breath. Silent, looking at you now, shaping sound strikes me as departure practice. Lifting up from the shoulders a little, listening for the measure marked tacit. Wave after wave, expanding against one another. Underneath loss lives touch. Every pool a person swims in is paid for by erasure. Bounty of flowerlessness and ungrasses. Saying, hush is to love sound, leaving, sap caught, reaching in the act. In our lifetimes, 40% of trans people will attempt suicide. I did. I am. Men could not see me as one of them, and what can I be but thankful I was a girl, and for that I was never given a gun. A word alongside another word placed in God's mouth incorrectly may be slower, but no less direct. If Melissa, is she apologizing for all the names she's learned to sharpen her body somehow into a kind of relief from that fact? What I know of logic comes from being touched by a corpse flower, kneeling to that which promises us injury, inflorescence. You until you are holy, you until you are not. Every day I depend on how we language me. Melissa understands that between her, I sleep like a shovel, like a saw blade still between hands, wants to turn, wants something difficult to cut. What I want is to hear someone I loved tell me not to die from my own tongue. Tell me the passing itself is holy, a grief hymn no God would want to sing without us. The invisible parts of my body are not the only ones I want to know love. I repeat, I repeat, I repeat the prayer I am most afraid of. Why did you not protect her? Why cannot the day be any day you hurt me doing absolutely nothing? Here is a mirror, I miss it already. You learning me, all of us looking at our hands. Dear Melissa, physicists say we change an object simply by turning our attention to it. Really, I am a grandson only when we are eating at Panera. One of us is lying always about her particular hunger. I love the children outside of me, counting to 30 while covering their eyes. Whose body will we sacrifice to be in the company of another? Each day across my ongoing, I haul the husk of her. Fire towers are designed for distance viewing, and I am right here, mothering you into the next life. Call me cover when you don't know who I could be. Times psychologic and legal assault. No one is listening to ice become water, burying you to keep us alive. And I'm gonna skip down to I'm actually going to skip down to the last one. It's My Melissa. I believe it's on page 6. And y'all feel free to say things. Or not. You are free. My Melissa. My Melissa, whose trans body is a house without a hacksaw, a nap inside a needle, a glass vase 3/4 full of smooth stones. Whose trans aorta is a mesquite tree careening through power lines, a Cooper's hawk lit by lightning. Whose trans lungs are 2 jars full of bumblebees singing on the uncovered back porch. Even our name is a match tossed into the fire it started, an edgeless invocation. Melissa, a wind made by swinging, grass cutting through concrete, bubble wrap being danced on, albeit slowly, as if that alone could quiet the tiny explosions down the hall. Whose trans-articular cartilage is string light threaded through the rafters. Whose tunica Medea is a sliver of decorated cardboard doubling as protest sign inside the window, which only serves to emphasize the window's inefficacy against the sun. Whose trans epiglottis is an apron on a hook. Whose trans trapezius are cups in the sink filled with inconsistently directed knives and spoons, whose trans metatarsals are green beans boiling on the stove, whose trans subclavian artery is organ pipe cactus under cloud cover, whose trans left ventricle is a black-capped goldfinch hanging upside down to eat, whose trans lesser trochanter is a hen's claw growing around a rope, whose trans great saphenous veins are technologies of prediction, tarot, storm tracker, political polls, whose trans dead space is the undeniable pollution of light, whose trans thyroid cartilage is commissioned graffiti, whose trans facial hair is the gentrifier yelling gentrification, whose trans urethrocytes are dapples of daylight drug across a concrete block wall, whose trans stroke volume is a live stream filibuster, whose trans plasma is the intimacy of strangers immediate in an emergency, whose trans plasma proteins are women filling a courtroom, one by one approaching the judge, performing all the mental and physical labor of obtaining a divorce, whose trans integumentary system is the myth of meritocracy, whose trans rectum is a local philanthropic institution, whose trans bile is the taste of a slap echoing in your mother's open palm, whose trans femoral vein is a cat's claws crafted search for the sun, whose trans pharynx is an empty building brimming with trampolines, whose trans ovaries are interrobangs used unironically, whose trans ureter is a stop sign stuffed with bullet holes near a ditch filled with sunflowers near a wasp nest near a farm. Sometimes I'm afraid I am afraid of me. My trans sympathetic nervous system, my trans fatigue cracks, my trans 1 Corinthians 3:16, training the God right out of my trans temple, all trans dove, no savior, a trans baptism, holy to be a fire, trans, trembling in the tear of the trans daughter, trans tongue. How I love you now, my trans vagina, my trans manubrium, my trans Melissa, in every iteration, TC Melissa Dawn Tolbert, who was once even a Harrison, a wife to a husband. Is it possible she loved me then too? Hiding, can she hear me say thank you to my trans uterus, my trans pectoralis major, my trans penis? The highest point on earth is in the ocean. Sea stars, our bodies becoming. A trans prayer, an infinite, inexhaustible rhizome of the heart. You whose tragus is trans, whose kidney, whose medulla oblongata, whose adrenal glands, whose cochlea, whose pleural space, whose trans sacrum is simultaneous, the sight of the storm and the keel of a storm-scored boat. Whose trans erector pili muscle is the fact that no matter when the sentence is read, it will be true that someone, somewhere, is trying to survive a sexual assault. Whose trans inferior vena cava is a clock that has not yet been hung on the wall. I love you, time, how trans you are. Your trans boredom, ribbon sharp and metal bold. You whose bark is trans, whose recovery, whose lumen, whose partial pressure, trans, in order to live, must continue to respond to changes in the lungs. And I'd like to end with a poem by someone else, if you don't mind to jump back to that other document. I definitely don't want the last word. Let's see here. I'm not sure if y'all can see the other. Yeah, here it comes. So, oh, sorry, I can't wait to read all your comments. I can see them, but I was on another screen. So it's so fun to go back and read all the comments. Well, I don't want to hold us up. So I'll read the poem and hopefully we'll be able to display it. And I'm also happy to share any of this with anyone. Let me find it on my laptop. This is a poem called Grammatical Error by Faiz Ahmad. And it was in, oh, what is that series called? It's not the Poem a Day series, but it's the other Poem a Day series. Anybody know what I'm talking about? We'll figure it out. Anyway, here's the poem, Grammatical Error. And this I think sums up sort of how I connect the political, my sort of private, personal work, and hope that it is always a larger lens into living a radical life that causes radical change in the world. A sky replaces the sky, almost imperceptibly, until we turn our heads around, face to face with the unholy axe that chopped our seeing in two. The world, a world. Thank you.
Thank you, TC. And it feels so right that we're ending first with these invitations to a more polyvocal experience of a reading, and then with a poem that reminds us even and especially the articles of our language matter and have tremendous import. Even those elements we think of as tiniest are really tremendous. Thank you to all of our readers. Thank you to the Brooklyn Rail for giving this space, and to everyone who's here listening and tuning in for making this, I think, a totally radical, beautiful, wonderful reading. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kyle. Thank you everyone for coming. Thanks, Kyle, for gathering everyone. TC said so, but this Zoom really has felt like a space of connection. I feel like totally has broadened my idea of what a Zoom poetry reading can be. So thank you, Ashley, Steve, Cassandra, Cheena Marie, Aria, and TC for reading. Thank you to everyone who came out today, and please join us at 1 p.m. tomorrow for the second installment of Common Ground with Jody Archambault and Abigail E. Disney. And next week we will have another radical poetry reading on Wednesday, curated by Patricia Spears Jones. And you all now have the ability to unmute yourselves for thank yous and goodbyes. But thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
Kyle. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Again and again, so helpful.
Thanks, Aria. Thanks, Cheena. And everyone.
And Emily, you did so much work. Thank you.
And Emily, thank you, Emily.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great reading.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kyle.
Thank you, Fong.
Cheena, thank you so much. This is amazing. Thank you for reading.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aria.
Thanks a lot. Beautiful reading.
So much. Thank you, Ashley. Hi, Benson.
Hello. Great reading. Thank you all.
Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you.
Yeah, we'll talk soon. Send in love and a lot of courage, you guys.